So, good morning, everybody. We've got a great panel here. I'd like to introduce them briefly. Then I'm going to ask you a couple of questions as an audience, and then we'll engage with the panelists a little bit more. But first to my left is Mike Genau. Mike is the U.S. President for Medtronic. Then we have Don Casey. Don is the CEO of the medical segment for Cardinal Health. And then we have Craig Simon, who is the CEO for FedEx SupplyChain. So welcome, gentlemen. Good morning. First off, I'd like to understand in the audience, of you all, how many have a significant emphasis of your products ex-US, outside of the US? Show of hands. Okay, of that group, how many emerging markets is a significant emphasis? Okay, that helps. We just wanted to let the panelists get a sense of the audience. So final question is size of organization. How many of you have less than $100 million of sales? Okay, that gives us a perspective. Thank you. Speakers, let us know a little bit about you and how supply chain fits into your organization and your role. Mike, why don't you start with just a little overview for us?
Sure, Glenn. Well, the way we look at it, obviously supply chain is a strategic component to our business. It's tightly linked upstream with how we do product development so that we can understand the requirements of the customer, wherever they may be, so that we can provide products in a quality way. And I think access to more markets makes supply chain even more critical as we look at how we build the business globally. The three areas, though, that we really focus in on is how we simplify the engagement. So the days of looking at supply chain is more of just moving product from A to B to where we can provide value through partnerships. And you'll hear some of that as the work that we've done not only with Cardinal but with FedEx. And so the simplification of that process and moving products is an important piece. And as you look at consolidation in the marketplace and the complexities that go on with the number of products we have, the number of SKUs that we have, some have to be consigned in the provider's account so that timely surgeries can be done, others not so much. So how do you balance that mix so your inventory levels and your cash is managed efficiently? And finally, I think that the third point is efficiency, and how do we take cost out of the system by working with both providers and our supply chain partners, and some of the innovative ways that we've actually opened up new markets through partnering with our supply chain partners has really enabled us to grow our business. So I'd really key in on those three areas.
Don?
Yeah, it's interesting. First, we tend to focus a little bit more in the U.S., and one of the challenges I'd throw out to the group is anyone's seen the following picture where you walk into an interventional cardiologist in the morning and look at their desk and see 28 Federal Express packages that have life-saving medical technology in them, oftentimes from the same company. And then if you walk down the hall to the orthopedic place, you might notice that there is in excess of probably 100 days of inventory that's been consigned to that institution. But the good thing is, just in case there wasn't enough consigned into the institution, there's the old rep's car, which might have another 100 days of inventory. But because there's that one instance in 1942 where those two levels of inventory might not have been right, that we need to make sure there's another 200 days of inventory in the system sitting behind that. And what we at Cardinal believe that it's time for the industry to kind of change the way of doing things on probably three different parameters, and it ties in very nicely, and I'm very lucky to be on a panel with two people who think very progressively. The first is, when are we going to start thinking about an information-enabled supply chain that's running into the hospitals? And the concern we have today is there's no natural demand signal that goes from when a doctor puts life-saving technology in all the way back to a manufacturing site, to the point where we can begin to look at how do we thin inventory out, and how do we create information that says, okay, Medtronic moved X, Y, and Z to this doctor on this day, and we can begin to link it to outcome, but then take that all the way back so that a manufacturing facility in Arizona for them might understand, okay, we just moved two of these, and how do we create that information-enabled thing? The second, look, the FDA is not going to go away in terms of the level of compliance and pedigree that's going to do things. And while we're all facing into the unique identifier, again, how do we as an industry begin to take that on? How can we help you at Cardinal? And the last issue, which is a little bit more controversial, is how do we begin to look at shared distribution platforms? So I'm sure every orthopedic company here is brilliant in moving lots of things. But the interesting issue is any industry that's generated 400 days of inventory between the manufacturing site and the patient site probably has an opportunity to improve. And how do we do that in a shared distribution manner that I think can dramatically lower cost? And that's what somebody like a FedEx does. And that's, you know, the thinking that Medtronic is going basically from patient all the way back to facility is going to begin to facilitate this thinking. So we go information enabled, really think about up in the level of compliance and look at a shared distribution platform is kind of where we think about things.
So for FedEx, supply chain is our life. And we have terrific partnerships with Cardinal and Medtronic, and I'm very happy to be up on stage with you guys as well. As I think about maybe change the question around is, well, why does FedEx care about MedTech? First of all, it is a very, very fast-growing segment, certainly a very large segment. It's a segment that has come to us and said, really, we need more. If you listen to what these two just said, the supply and the demand landscape is changing very rapidly across this sector. And so what are the opportunities for the optimization, for increasing the quality manner in which products are delivered to end providers, and how can we as a supply chain provider provide some assistance in that? And so they're constantly pushing us. Medtronic goes back many, many years, more than 10 years, to say, FedEx, what more can you do here? And they have pushed us to develop new services that are dedicated to the healthcare sector. FedEx it's a large organization. We have 330,000 employees. We operate in 220 countries around the world. We have 600 aircraft, 90,000 trucks. And yet we realized that we had to be very specific in the healthcare and in the MedTech segments, that just because we were so pervasive across supply chains, that wasn't good enough, and we've been very specific with technologies, services that we have rolled out for the MedTech segment.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen, for the introductory comments. By the way, we put index cards on people's chairs with the hope, probably a dream, that we would be able to answer some questions. I think in a half an hour that may be tough, but if you write your question down, pass it out to our colleagues over here, and if you have an email there too. If we don't get to it, we'll try and follow up with those questions. So to the first question for the panelists, you've seen a lot of change, gentlemen, over the time that you've been in the career serving the industry. Tell us a little bit about the change in the buyer-seller relationship, and you know, what's markedly different about that today. You know, who's driving that change? What are they trying to accomplish with those changes? The nature of the relationship, that would be helpful. Mike, can you start?
Well, I think we've touched on it a little bit, and I think the buyer-seller relationship is really becoming more challenging, as we know. We want to move from a discussion that's purely transactional to one that's more value-based. And in order to do that, you have to look at all the variables. And certainly, as we think about supply chain, we look at that as an opportunity to differentiate. But I think, you know, when you look at the commoditization and what's happening with even hospitals that are rationalizing fewer SKUs on the shelf, Don's great example of inventory and how you have redundancies built in, but it only takes one case to be missed to really throw yourself into a very bad spot. And with these life-saving therapies, nobody wants to be that one. So I think the relationship is the expectation on the provider side is always have it available and have it available when I need it. From industry, what we're trying to do is what's the most cost-effective way that we can manage that supply, which forces us to do things like consignment. But even with those redundancies and consignment and doing all that we can to prevent missing that single case, we have to look at the balance sheet at the end of the day and say there's got to be a more cost-effective way to do it. And so we have entered into many pilots and programs, and FedEx being one that we've had a lot of success with for finding innovative ways to take cost out, take some efficiency out, and not interrupt that provider need to have that product when it's available.
Yeah, look, the pace of healthcare is changing almost on a logarithmic scale. And for perspective, in our business, 5 years ago, our top 100 customers were a little under 40% of our business. And today in the U.S., that number is approaching 65. in 5 years. So it's become a very rapidly consolidating market. And unfortunately, right now, a lot of our customers have become a very price-oriented, and Mike was said it very well. You know, they think we're all commodities. And you know, I think the challenge for all of us is to do two things. The first is we have to examine what we do well, and in some cases, like we feel that FedEx moves things really, really well. However, you know, we manage a different part of the supply chain. So how do we outsource what we don't do well to somebody who does that really well? And I think it's a question all of us have to ask ourselves. How do we deliver value by being as efficient as we possibly can by focusing on what we do well? So when you start there, I think that can provide a little bit of headroom in the price negotiation that go on. Then the second issue is, and again, hats off to Medtronic as one of the pioneers in here, you know, if you begin to look at how do you create total value for your partners that isn't necessarily all driven on a price. So whether it's somebody like Federal Express, partnering with them in China, Mike, what you guys are doing in managing a total cath lab in the UK as an example, we do a lot of things where we will now go in and manage a total operating room inventory, literally sitting in what we refer to as the pro shop, where we believe that we can dramatically improve the efficiency of the operating room as well as drive the inventory down. But that is not a price conversation. It is, okay, right now you have 14 you know, FTEs running 7 operating rooms over the course of the day. We think we can drive that down to 10 so you could repurpose the nurses. So again, specialize on what you do well, point one. Point two is move the conversation to total value by looking at the entire value chain of an operation and how do we take on a bigger chunk of that as a way of partnering and giving efficiencies back to our partners.
That's great. And Don, you mentioned consolidation and how much consolidation is going on. That really is changing the nature of that relationship. I think, Craig, you've had some experience working with consolidation. I think you mentioned in our prior discussions Intermountain Healthcare as an example. Can you talk a little bit about how consolidation has affected that relationship?
Yeah, consolidation in this case from the provider networks and really being driven by the IDNs around the U.S. And there's been some very good examples of IDNs and hospital groups coming together and trying to take control of their inbound supply chain to be able to manage the cost better, take out some of the inefficiencies that Don was speaking about. There's Lisar down in Tampa as well. There's a number of them that have been successful. So what they've done is they've set up their own distribution centers, inbound distribution centers, to take away from some of the tactical supply chain activities that go on in the basements and on the receiving docks of hospitals. So it's created efficiencies from a speed and accuracy of being able to do those processes, and also made it easier for the providers inside the hospitals themselves to handle that product, because it comes to them in a nice bundled fashion from that, in this case, Intermountain Health Distribution Center. So that's easier for them to take into the unit and put it away into the unit itself. Now, the trouble with that is, well, I mentioned a couple of good examples. The majority of them, I would say 80–85% plus, are still struggling with this. And what they're not only trying to figure out is how not only to take the commodity products, but how to move that to the physician preference products. And when I think about for this audience, I mean, knowing that that's where those IDNs and ultimately the customers want to go to, and they hold the ultimate decision, what can we all collectively do to make that job easier for them so that they're not, the incentives for them to, in essence, take control of that inbound supply chain aren't as acute maybe as they are today. So that's some changes that are occurring in that relationship at the hospital level from a supply chain standpoint.
Okay. And I think historically that's been called the prime vendor model, that the health systems like to kind of manage and simplify that supply chain. So you're saying that's changing?
Well, I mean, there's the prime vendor from a procurement standpoint, yeah. Which can sometimes be coupled with the supply chain and sometimes decoupled. I will say, though, that changing anything with the supply chain does change that supplier relationship. It changes the terms of sale, yeah. With that. and the whole procurement aspect needs to be a part and parcel with the logistics change for these models as well. I agree with that.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about more the international aspect of it. Again, we've got quite a number of companies that are doing a big portion of business internationally. Different ballgame there, right? Different dynamics. Mike, you want to start?
Yeah, Don touched on it. We've put forth an effort where, as we've worked in the different markets in Europe in particular, what we've learned is a better way to partner with the providers is to understand their needs, which we all get that. But when you dig into that a little bit, you understand that cost of capital, access to capital is a constraint for their ability to grow and drive revenue. And so one of the programs that we rolled out a couple of years ago was a turnkey solution to manage cath labs, and now we've broadened that to a managing services platform that may extend beyond cath labs. And the idea being that we'll provide some financing as well as help source and pull together and procure equipment, product, even human capital as it relates to nursing to help that institution deliver more value through taking care of more patients in a timely manner with high quality equipment. So this program has been well received, and we're seeing the adoption rate really pick up now, and it's an investment on our part, an investment on their part, so both sides put together kind of a win-win scenario, and the way that we see it evolving over time is we'll extend it beyond just the cath lab. And it's, again, an area where we'll leverage some Medtronic product and services, but we also bring many other partners into the cath lab. As you can imagine, the different types of equipment that would be needed. So it's a way for us to partner across industry and to help forge, I think, a better way to deliver quality care in those markets. And we'll see how we go beyond Europe now. We're actually starting to get some interest in the US and parts of Latin America.
That changes the whole nature of that relationship completely.
Oh, absolutely, because back to, we don't want to be seen as a vendor. We don't want to only transact. We want to be seen as a valued partner in that relationship. So we got to think, I think, less about product-specific initiatives, more about patient needs and what that means holistically, whether it's at the procedure level or managing that patient, whether it's inpatient or in the post-acute setting.
Okay. And Don, how about from a Cardinal standpoint? Are you guys also looking at some of these different business models? How does Cardinal look at that?
Yeah, the best example for us is in China, where and again, I think Mike said it very well, let's focus on the patient need. And again, we're probably not as broad in China as we'd like, but we actually, 6 years ago, bought a company, Yangyu, which we've now made 14 strategic acquisitions next to it, to the point where we can reach pretty much the entire coastal area. But the premise there is that you have a desire on the part of patients who are all doing cash pay that if they're going to buy a Medtronic product, they in fact want to know it's a Medtronic product that came from Medtronic. So how do we provide, kind of chain of custody logistic efficiencies that can take and guarantee that something that usually moved by FedEx, gets in country and it actually gets from point A to the doctor where there's been a very clear chain of custody and you can guarantee the product. So that's an example where you almost need to go all the way back to what Mike was saying, patient, and then build something back out to do that. And look, we believe if you begin to look at some of the emerging markets, the idea that you can get reliable, efficient logistics from a third-party company like ourselves, and usually that's done in combination with somebody like FedEx, should provide a great opportunity for Medtronic to focus on what it needs to do well. Plus, we're going to guarantee the patients we're going to give them the confidence that what we say they're getting is in fact what they're getting.
Right. So it sounds like you focused on value in some of your other comments. The value equation is a little different then.
Absolutely. The value is certainty in the case of China.
Yeah. And Craig, how does FedEx deal with some of these changing business models and again, the differences and variations across the globe then?
Yeah, I mean, let's just take the cath lab as an example. So Don talked about the 20 FedEx packages sitting on a desk in a hospital, and those packages are all going to be about this size. Well, now you start talking about a whole cath lab, and just the size of the shipments themselves, right, are quite different, which also means that you're not going to be shipping those necessarily on an airplane. So what it means for us is we need to provide a different type of service a bulk transportation service. We need to provide, in some cases, slower services. So it's not just for FedEx anymore about getting it there as fast as we can. It's getting it there at the right time, the right speed, with the most cost-efficient speed as well. It also means for us being able to expand geographies. So not doing just the services that everybody should be familiar with here in the US, but expanding those services to countries like China and Mexico and Brazil and India and UK and Poland and France, where we've made acquisitions in the last 6-7 years to deliver domestic services in those countries. And then the last piece that it's forced us to do is to expand our warehousing services. So one of the things we've done very closely with Medtronic is to open up some warehouses in various parts around the world. We run 7 of them for Medtronic out in Asia, the most recent one in Indonesia. You know, those places are not as easy to do business as the UK is. So it does stretch us in expanding our portfolio of services, but in the end, it makes us better on what we can deliver to the marketplace.
All right, that's great. Again, when we poll the audience, number of companies out there that are on the smaller end of the spectrum, what advice do you give smaller companies that are still trying to establish their presence in the market from a supply chain standpoint? Mike, can we start with you?
Well, I mean, I think actually size, being small, could have an advantage if you can differentiate your business in a way, and I say that intentionally, so it's not just trying to get a foothold through a product, but what is that value that you can deliver, and it will cause you to think about partnering in a different way, whether it be with a Cardinal or a FedEx. But I think the ultimate objective is what are those customer needs and how you identify a way to differentiate. But you know, we have businesses, we've acquired a lot of businesses, small and large, and so as we look at how we continue to bring value to those businesses and those companies, in many cases we let them continue to run as they have, whether it's continuing to build on that brand or that relationship that they have, so that they don't get swallowed up into the big, large Medtronic engine, which could, in some cases, work against them. So we actually look at that as a way where we can leverage size and scale where appropriate and where needed. In other cases, I think letting those individual companies and those assets that are valued continue with their value-based initiative is proven to work real well.
Yeah, I'd build on what Mike was saying and just basically ask, if you're a small company, what value are you adding to the equation, and stay laser-like focused on that, and then partner everything else. I can't tell you how many times over the 30 years I've been doing this, you have conversations with smaller companies that are beginning to invest. Okay, I now have a VP of supply chain, I now have X, Y, and Z, and in a lot of cases, what people around here are trying to provide are life-saving technologies, usually wrapped up with some kind of service. Well, focus on that, deliver outstanding patient care, but then look at what you need to do well, and by and large, you're not going to be as good at moving product as, say, a Federal Express. You're not going to be as good at warehousing and commercializing a product into a specific institution as, say, Cardinal Health is. So, you know, I'd really advocate to ask yourself, what do you have to be good at? What is your competitive advantage? Stay focused on that, partner everything else out, because there's a good chance you're going to be able to get scale from a partner that might be taking up a lot of your capital when you should be applying the capital to your competitive advantage.
And study what the large companies have done. I mean, there's been a lot of road that's been traveled that smaller companies can learn from. And even if you just look at the ease of doing business around the world today is so much better just due to technologies and communications and the ability to Skype with potential suppliers or potential customers or distributors around the world. It's just so much easier. The infrastructure from a warehouse standpoint, the warehouses that are now available around the world, you get nice Class A facilities in India 10 years ago. Really, really hard to find any one of those. And they're now available to smaller companies as well. Now, you do have to take advantage of these outsourced providers, but they're there ready to help you in different parts around the world. So it's so much easier than it was 5-10 years ago as a smaller company, and follow what some of the big companies have helped put in place.
And that's a great lead off to my final question, Craig, in terms of 5, 10 years ago. Now let's shift to 5, 10 years in the future. What's going to change? What do you see on the horizon from a supply chain standpoint? Craig, would you mind starting?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things. What I'll focus in on is sensor-based technology. So the availability of little devices about the size of a phone that can ride along with a shipment and at any point in time can be transmitting the important critical statistics about that shipment. Temperature control is now more important than ever, but as is humidity, as is how much vibration has a product undergone through shipment. The ability to know where that product is, that shipment is at all times. You can set these sensors up so that if the product deviates from its scheduled route, Brazil, for example, there's a lot of security issues in Brazil. If it deviates from that route, there's an alarm that goes off, you know about it. Now, the technology is still fairly expensive. It's reserved for the most critical shipments, but over time, sensors are going to become more ubiquitous, may even become part of products themselves. And the ability to read those sensors, look at the information, act on that information, be able to manage the supply chain in real time is really going to come in the next 5 to 10 years.
That's right. John, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask everyone to visit our booth, 226, and Rob Doon is right over there, because we believe the future for us is starting now with what we're calling our National Logistic Network, which is basically, if you look at the dog's breakfast we've collectively made out of the supply chain going into hospitals where, you mentioned prime vendors. There's 3 prime vendors. Actually, Medline is in the room as well. So Medline owns mine and Cardinal. We're all pushing stuff into the same hospitals. We collectively have built 120 warehouses around the U.S. and I know Mike's business and Shannon's business enough to know that they have 5 or 6 regional collection centers. You multiply that by the 200 members of AdvaMed, we've probably created a marvel of inefficiency. And one of the things that we would really like to do over the next couple of years is really ask people to think through soup to nuts. How are you getting one of your great products from where you're going to where it needs to be to benefit a patient, and look for shared synergies. And we believe that there are people like FedEx or people like a Cardinal Health that can really take advantage of shared logistics and shared infrastructure to be transformative in not only the pace and accuracy of which gets things, but deliver a lot of value.
Great. Mike?
Great points. I would just add that as you think of supply chain, I think broadly. So a couple of things. One is over the next 10 years, innovation and technology, we have to reinvent, and we'll continue to invest that way. But I would say we still have a lot of work to do with just X's and O's and how we operate today, and I think that's going to carry us for a while. What I mean by that is take a spine procedure. We develop spine trays out of our Memphis facility. Those trays need to be delivered overnight to the various cases, and the physician may only use 1 or 2, maybe a handful of components, and then that tray comes back to us. So it's highly important that we deliver that, but it's highly inefficient. We've still got to find ways, because of the way technology is delivered today, to improve upon that. And I'm not sure how you do it, to be honest. I think there are a lot of ways that we can take cost out in some of the products. But given some of the way that our interaction with physicians is so urgent to get that product there for a life-saving procedure or a trauma case, we're going to have complexity and waste that we're not going to be able to move away from. But I think if we can find ways through partnerships and working with industry to streamline that, we can invoke maybe the 80-20 rule. We can take a lot of cost out of about 80% of it and just accept the fact that a fraction or 20% of it is going to be expensive because of the nature of the product. So I think it's a great question, one that we would rely on ideas to try to solve it. But I think over the next 10 years, you're going to see improvement on what we're doing today to make it better and more efficient, but also be looking for ways that technology, like the UDI system that's coming out now on products. UDI in many cases is viewed as a negative from one side, but on the other side, it could be an advantage, is how we trace products, how we count products, and how we inventory to reduce some of the supply that's in the marketplace. So It's a great question.
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen. I was overambitious in thinking we might get to card questions. If you had something that was pressing, get it to me or my colleagues, and we'll try and follow up and get you some answers. But thank you, Mike, Don, Craig, for your time this morning and your insights. Thank you.
Good job.